All right, good evening to everyone on this beautiful sunny afternoon. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Marissa Gillette, and I am the chairman of the Connecticut Public Utilities Regulatory Authority, or PURA. So it's really nice to see so many folks joining this evening and the interest that was expressed in this. I assume everybody knows why we are here, but I'm going to start there. So this evening we are gathered for what PURA refers to as a public listening session. So our primary purpose this evening is to kick off this really important docket at PURA focused on performance-based regulation by hearing from ratepayers and elected officials and organizations starting out this journey with a public listening session. If you're not familiar with PURA proceedings, that's okay. We're really trying to design this so we can increase engagement in this really transformative process. I did want to flag a few things for folks. Number one, we are recording this evening in case you want to go back and reference anything that you see or hear this evening. We will make the recording available on our website. Second of all, PURA, because we operate like a quasi-judicial agency, like a court, we do have a court reporter here with us this evening who transcribes the proceedings for us so that we can look back to the testimony and comments that you all are going to provide this evening. So we do ask that you please refrain from using the chat feature in here because the chat is not a part of our official record. The official record is what is provided by the court reporter. Finally, how we are going to, I just want to cover the run of show this evening. Myself and my staff have 5 or 6 slides that we just wanted to do some context setting to let you know how the context for this docket and how we are, the next steps that we have envisioned thus far. At that time, that should take 5-10 minutes at most. At that time, we are going to turn to receiving public comment. So I know that we have Representative David Arconti here with us this evening, which as you will hear, he was one of the architects of the Take Back Our Grid Act, which is a large part of why we're here this evening. So I'm interested to hear from him as well as you all. If you are interested in making public comment this evening, at any time, we would invite you to get into the queue by finding the raise hand function. The raise hand function is under the reactions tab at the bottom of this screen. It's a second from the right, it should say reactions, and there's already somebody who's found it. So if you want to get into the queue, we will turn to the queue as soon as we get through these stage setting remarks. So with that, we're going to turn to our presentation here. If you are new to PURA and our processes, some of this terminology is going to be new to you. And the first thing that may be new is this reference to a docket. And specifically, this is docket number 210515. As I mentioned a moment ago, PURA as a quasi-judicial agency operates a lot like a court, and we use docket numbers to essentially organize our work. So this specific work is focused on establishing performance-based regulation, and it is docketed as 210515. And I'm calling that to your attention specifically here. So if you have comments after this evening, we are going to speak to how you can provide comments throughout this proceeding by referencing that docket number. Oops. Okay. So I assume you know a little bit about what performance-based regulation is, having joined us this evening. But at its core, it's an entirely different approach to utility regulation that places the greater emphasis on the customer and whether the customer is the state and the policy goals that the state and the elected officials have come up with, or more importantly, what the individual customer or ratepayer is desiring as an outcome from the utility. So PBR, or performance-based regulation, or PBR for short, is redefining the focus of regulation. And as I alluded to when we kicked off tonight's proceeding, the reason that we're here is because of Public Act 20-5, which is colloquially referred to as Take Back Our Grid, which was adopted during a special session following Tropical Storm Isaias 2 years ago. And that act did a lot of things. One of those things was to direct PURA to investigate, develop, and implement a PBR framework, which is really huge because PBR, while there are elements of it, implemented in other states and across the country and the globe, really there's only one other state in the United States who has transitioned fully to PBR, or is in the process of transitioning fully to PBR, and that's Hawaii. So I really applaud the General Assembly and the administration for their leadership on passing that bipartisan bill. It has given PURA some direction about the types of metrics or objectives that we could undertake in the PBR docket, but we are also interested in getting feedback from you all on what those metrics and objectives could be. So next I'm going to turn it over, we have about 3 more slides. I'm going to turn it over to PURA's Director of our Technical Staff Division, Josh Ryer, who's just going to give you additional context setting here and next steps. And then, like I mentioned, we're going to open the floor to comments, please. So Josh.
Great, thanks so much, Chairman Gillette. We'll talk just a little bit more about why and what is performance-based regulation. And to understand that, I think we just to kind of set the context on what is traditional regulation. And the model really historically has been what's called this cost of service model. And I'll point at the end of the presentation to some resources that'll dive into what that means and how to compare it against performance-based regulation. But 2 points that I just want to make up front is that it really is based off of the cost for the utility to provide electric service, both the actual investments they need to make and their operating expenses. In largely this model, under this model, I should say, utility profit is driven by the amount of capital investments they have because they earn or are allowed to earn a return on equity on those investments. Also, conversely, though, in certain circumstances, and I'm speaking very generally here, there's actually not as much of an incentive for utilities to focus on efficiency with operating expenses. Again, I'm speaking generally, and there's more resources out there to explain that, but those are just 2 high-level points. So why, one of the opportunities when we're thinking about and investigating performance-based regulation is it really gives us the ability to look at a modified approach to cost of service or a cost recovery framework that better aligns kind of the metrics of a utility performance with the actual return that the utility receives. And so we can go to the next slide. That segues nicely into why PBR is important. Great. So really just reiterating what the chairman said to start out with about what is PBR. Why it's important is because it better aligns utility financial incentives and kind of the framework better aligns with the desired public outcomes for utility service and public policy objectives. So just at a very high level, and these are, of course, today we're here to hear from you all about the outcomes and objectives that you think that we should focus on in this investigation. But some of the potential improvements are listed here. They include better customer service and experience, enhanced grid resilience, which of course is important and becoming increasingly important, increased focus on metrics, benchmarks, and incentives to really make sure we're meeting our greenhouse gas emission targets and exceeding those, deployment of renewable energy resources, energy efficiency, and also allow for a safe space in growth of novel technologies, novel clean energy technologies and others that will help us meet some of these public outcomes and policy objectives. Next slide. Oh, hit some 2 add-ons there. Just to go back real quick. It also, the framework allows for additional flexibility as well to really adapt to the public outcomes and policy objectives at a state and federal level, and also from customers, and encourages new utility business models that are adaptive and responsive to these desired outcomes. Now we can go to the next slide. Great. So really importantly, of course, we're here today to hear from all of you, but how to get involved. This will be an investigation at PURA, as we've mentioned a couple of times, the first phase of which will take the next year, and we've laid out already. And so it's really important to not only hear from you all today, but also through the docket. So if you want to keep up to speed on what's happening in the docket and where we're at in our investigation, there's a link here, and the slides will be made available through our website as well after this, to be given or to receive docket notifications and updates. And then also we take the comments and written comments from the public at any time. So you can see here that there's directions for how to do that. And again, you can get the slides later, and those links will take you to the right places. And then just 2 more slides before we get to comments, or actually 2 more titles, 3 more slides actually. Just real quick, I mentioned, I very quickly went over the what and the why of PBR. There's, PURA has also recorded a very similar video, but a little bit longer and more accurately explained, that is a hyperlink there. If you just type in Connecticut PURA and go to our YouTube page, there's a quick 4-minute video that kind of goes into a little bit more detail what I just walked through. And then also an organization called Vote Solar, along with other nonprofits, also did a much longer webinar a while ago on PBR 101 in Connecticut. And so just to be clear, we're not necessarily advocating for anything that's said in that or saying that it's correct, but it is a resource that's available to you all. And then the next 2 slides, we can talk about next steps. So just immediate next steps after today's listening session. Actually, forthcoming is a paper from PURA staff that'll outline some of the public outcomes, public policy and utility outcomes that might be what we're looking for out of a PBR investigation. So that staff white paper that's forthcoming will propose some goals and outcomes, and really what we want to do at this stakeholder workshop that's scheduled for April 5th to start at 10 a.m. and it'll be most of the day, is to walk through those proposed goals and outcomes, and again, to workshop with stakeholders what are the right goals and what are the right outcomes. And then last slide. Great. After that workshop, there'll be an additional opportunity for stakeholders to have their voice heard through written comments that would be submitted into our docket and be responsive to not only the staff concept paper, but also the workshop. And then additionally, those I already mentioned earlier that we've laid out an agenda for the next year plus for this investigation. So for folks that want to see all the extra steps that I'm not going to list this evening, you can go to this notice that's hyperlinked in the slides. And also at any time, you can check back at PURA's external docket calendar.
Great, thank you, Josh. So with that, as promised, we want to get into the public comment portion of this evening, and just a reminder that we're looking for folks to get into the queue so that we can recognize you to offer testimony for our record. If you're interested in providing comments this evening, again, we just invite you to locate the raise hand function, which is under the reactions tab at the bottom of the screen. And we've got a line forming. I am going to cede the floor first to Representative Arconti as the architect of the Take Back Our Grid Act, and then we will proceed from there. So Rep. Arconti, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Gillette. I appreciate the time, and I especially appreciate this listening session. I'm treating this kind of like a public hearing in the legislature, so it's my turn to be on this side. So I just wrote out some comments. I kept them to 3 minutes to be helpful for you this evening. So just thank you, Chair Gillette, Vice Chair Bukowski, and Commissioner Karen for hosting this public listening session on docket 21-05-15. This docket, as the good chair mentioned, is a result of Public Act 20-5, otherwise known as the Take Back Our Grid Act. Is one of my proudest accomplishments as House Chair of the Energy and Technology Committee, was co-authoring that public act and also passing it in the way we did with a very, very strong bipartisan vote in both chambers. The events from the summer of 2020 showed us the traditional cost of service regulation model was in dire need of reform. And I believe a PBR framework will benefit both customers and utilities. Legislators and PUCs all across the country are now looking at PBR models to help reduce customer costs and modernize our electric grid. Electricity decarbonization can coexist with affordability. PBR will allow regulators to have the tools they need to protect customers from unnecessary rate hikes. And I would ask the authority to look at the customer dividend and the utility management audits in Hawaii's PBR framework in your PBR docket. Customer rates in Hawaii are set to decrease because of these two provisions. Over the last couple of years in the legislature, we've heard the term utility 2.0 quite often. And I believe we're well on our way to accomplishing that goal between PURA's grid mod docket and now this PBR docket, moving away from a traditional cost of service framework. Connecticut customers want an affordable, reliable, clean grid, and I applaud the authority for the amazing work it's doing and for being great partners with the legislature. So thank you for your time tonight. I assume you have a lot of people to get to. I appreciate everyone, all the customers throughout Connecticut who are going to participate on tonight's call. And I see one of my constituents on the call. I see her here on the screen, Mary Consoli. Just want to give a quick shout out to her from Danbury, who hopefully will participate tonight. So with that, thank you, Chair Gillette, for the time.
Thank you, Representative Arconti. We appreciate you being here, and comments and recommendations are entered into the record.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so next up, I see in the queue, Simon Metz, please.
Hello, and thank you again for hosting this session and allowing me to speak. The one thing I want to focus on very briefly is, as far as performance, and I would say lack thereof, is a lot of comments have been made that focus on the, terrible storm in August of 2020. Unfortunately, I have many instances of really poor performance, both in supply and customer service, totally outside of August 2020. And I'll give you some instances. So I live in Washington Depot. My father lives in Roxbury. We've been in the area since the days of CLMP, when in fact, we rarely had an electric problem, rarely. I have been in my house since 2014 until last summer. I had constant blinking lights, constant drops in voltage, 2 spikes which blew power equipment off my basement wall. Eversource denied that these conditions existed. Eversource refused to pay for damage. The only way I started to get response was I'm a management consultant. I found the direct email address of the former CEO. I sent him an email. They finally sent an engineer out. They put a recording meter on, and lo and behold, after denying for 6 years, they found I had 40% drops in voltage, which is not allowed under statute. The 2 spikes, they have still refused to pay for. My father has had 2 spikes. One of them blew up a washing machine in Roxbury. Eversource refused to pay for it. They admit they are the only supplier of electricity. The only way a spike can get into a house is through their lines, yet they deny these claims time and time again. I have been told by many managers of Eversource, who I love the street crews, the guys that come here, that Eversource is told about infrastructure issues and refuses to spend money. These are senior engineers that go back to their bosses and say, we got a problem here, we got a problem here. They will not spend money. I have reported poles leaning over at 45-degree angles, not touched. So on the issue of performance-based, I applaud you. I have spent thousands of dollars in propane costs because every time there's a brownout, my generator, which is a smart generator, kicks on and will not stop until it senses clean power. It's called the sine wave. It's looking for clean power. Eversource refuses to pay for that. So they're completely absolving themselves of any performance issues. They act like they provide perfect service. So again, I applaud your efforts. I want to be involved. I can send you detailed information. I can send you the abrupt, no, we won't pay for these. I have emails, I have recorded phone calls. But I really think Eversource needs to, as was done with Verizon in the state of New York, I did some research, where when performance was poor, they did not get a rate increase. It was denied for many years in the state of New York because the performance was poor. So thank you again. I want to give others a chance, and I will keep in touch with everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Metz. I think we'd be very interested in the evidence and research that you just referenced. The slide deck has the email address, pura.executivesecretary@ct.gov. And if you reference the docket number, we can get that posted to our public docket, and it would become part of the record for everyone's consideration. So I appreciate that and look forward to reviewing further. Okay, I apologize, I'm not going to pronounce this correctly. Mr. John Siebel? Not close, am I? Just make sure you take yourself off mute, sir.
Yes, first of all, I'd like to thank you for instituting this way for us to communicate, and also just like to say that everything that PURA has done so far, really threading the needle, getting systems to work for all concerned in the best possible ways. I think that approach of really trying to put it together from every viewpoint is wonderful, and I appreciate that. What I'm concerned about, I'm a member of the Ashford Clean Energy Task Force, and what we've seen happening for many years now are connection issues. And we believe that what's happening is it's due to a lack of planning. We see a lot of work being done on the network, the big stuff. But what we don't see is a focus on the distribution end, starting from the customer end. We really don't see anything like a satellite view of trying to locate where we have big rooftops where we could expect a need for a lot of distributed solar. And it just seems like a real fault in the planning, that the planning is focused on the big systems and not on the distribution end. The distributed systems are really tremendously efficient way for the system to work. And we installed a solar system on our firehouse many years ago. It had to be a fraction of the size that it should have been because the transformer capability wasn't there. And really the situation isn't improving. So what I'd like to see is somehow to get into the performance metric, something that has to do with planning and planning of the network from the distribution end. That's basically what I'd like to say. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, you were cutting out a little bit at the end, so I just want to say back to you what I think you're asking us for. So a performance metric that is looking at, is your request targeted more to us ensuring that they're planning, or you want transparency for members of the public to understand the planning process?
I think the first. Really, I think that if there is insufficient planning, then that should be reflected in compensation. And you know, the insufficiency in planning is showing up over and over again in all these systems that are a fraction of the size that they could be. So we're not making any progress there. And maybe if that goes into the performance metric, maybe that's one way to help.
Understood. So it's almost like we're a performance metric around the integration of distributed energy resources like rooftop solar, et cetera, into their planning process.
Exactly. Yes. Very well said.
Thank you. I appreciate your time this evening.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Okay, next up we have Mr. Oliver Tully.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Oliver Tully. I'm a policy strategist at Acadia Center, which is a nonprofit research and advocacy organization focused on clean energy policy, and we work in Connecticut and throughout New England. We'd just like to express our appreciation of PURA for opening this proceeding on performance-based regulation, and we're grateful for Representative Arconti's leadership on this as well. The way that utilities are regulated today has resulted in financial incentives that are misaligned with Connecticut's public policy goals. As Josh's slides earlier noted, cost of service regulation creates financial incentives for utilities to invest in traditional capital-intensive infrastructure projects on which they have an opportunity to earn a return. But this dynamic creates barriers for other solutions that may better serve ratepayers and may be more aligned with our societal and climate goals, but which may not earn utilities as high a financial return. So we believe that PBR is an important tool that regulators can use to help ensure that utility investments consider the benefits of clean energy, the need to advance environmental justice, and the reforms that are necessary to achieving Connecticut's climate goals. By establishing robust performance criteria, reporting requirements, as well as financial rewards or penalties, PBR can alter the financial incentives that guide utility investments, which therefore can better align utility decisions with public policy goals. We're really looking forward to working with the authority and other stakeholders to identify key policy objectives around utility regulation and establishing performance criteria to ensure that Connecticut's utilities are best serving ratepayers and the state overall. Like Chairman Gillette mentioned, we agree that this is a really important proceeding, and we appreciate the very robust and collaborative process that PURA outlined for the months ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Oliver. Do you know if Acadia Center has a #1 objective that you'd like to see out of this hearing, I mean, out of this proceeding?
A #1 objective might be difficult because we have a lot of priorities, but I can definitely get back to you outlining that in more detail.
I think there will be plenty of opportunities for that. I'm just curious if you had singled in or narrowed in on a single one yet, but I will look forward to the additional comments. Thank you. Okay, let's see. I have Paula Panzero. I'm gonna really butcher some names this evening.
I'm actually Frank Panzarella. Thank you. Thank you so much for doing this. I think this is great. I mean, giving feedback for how these utilities operate, I think is really important. So thank you again for that. I'm sorry, I'm not very much on all the jargon of these things, but for me, I've been following these energy issues for more than 30 years in Connecticut, and worked with people in the legislature to try to come up with an omnibus bill to really improve the use of renewable energy in the state of Connecticut. And supposedly we have these really ambitious goals to achieve these things. But over the years, I learned a lot of things, like how our IRPs were primarily written by the utilities and basically poo-pooed and downplayed the use of renewables, and gave a lot of bogus information, which later was finally revealed not to be true, that Connecticut is a great place for solar power and other kinds of renewables. There's not enough being done. And the utilities, they should be part of the process with pushing advanced ideas and ways to get rid of the ridiculous regulations that seem to trap us in the same system that we are in now. And just a simple example from my own life is I can't expand the solar on the rooftop of my house because it's based on what I have been using in the past in the way of electricity. And yet, you know, I'm somebody who wants to be, I want my whole house to be on nothing but solar. I want to get rid of my oil furnace. And the rules, the way the rules are written, we can't do that. Even if we want to do the right thing, we can't do it. And that's one thing that I think needs to change. And I think the utilities, together with PURA and the state, should be finding the tools and the regulation and the oversight. And that should be part of the utilities' goals. That needs to be overlooked by the state. And another example is the utilities are responsible for the efficiency programs. But is anybody policing the subcontractors that they send out to do these things? I had one of those companies come here, and the people didn't even know how to put on a threshold on a door. That's how badly they were trained or incompetent. This is craziness. And we spend millions of dollars on programs supposedly administered by these, and they're not doing their job properly. You know, I mean, and, you know, I'm sure somebody has already mentioned the storms. You know, we don't expect miracles. We don't expect everything to change overnight. But why is there not even a beginning small underground? In perhaps in the most, if you looked at a map and you tracked the weather patterns and you saw the towns that were repeatedly getting trashed by storms and having trees cut, look how much money they spend bringing in teams from all over the country. Hundreds of thousands of dollars are spent every year doing the same stupidity, when they could, even if they did one town a year or one part of a town a year to bring those cables underground when other things are being done. Every area has areas of the city that are being dug up for many other reasons. If they combined forces and use their common sense to, you know, anyway, I don't want to go on, but I'm sorry for taking too long, but there's just a lot of things that to me need more oversight.
I appreciate that. So maybe if I can say back to you, I almost heard a couple of different suggestions for objectives in there. It sounds like, are you expressing concern over the interconnection, like when they turn on the resources like solar? Like you're worried about the interconnection of the resources, or you're more worried about the sizing of the resources and maybe how the utilities are or are not interacting to advance or alter those program rules? Is that, I'm not sure. Oh, I'm sorry, you're on mute.
yes, the utilities should be involved at the state level to resolve these issues, not to just sit on it and on their laurels and allow the regulations to continue this way that inhibits the expansion of solar in particularly in urban areas. And there's nothing being done about common site solar. I mean, if you're going to have environmental justice, I mean, the cities get nothing from it. It's all going to the suburbs primarily because there's more room, and their houses are not blocked by tall buildings and all the obstacles in the urban areas. I mean, there's no real program to make these things happen in the urban setting. And like many other states, like Massachusetts, have their community solar programs and all that. Why are we so far behind? I don't understand it, truthfully. And it seems that that's all about the proactiveness of the energy companies as well as the proactiveness of the state. But what are they doing to resolve these issues on the state level? And I feel like that's should be part of their game plan, and there should be oversight of that as part of their duties if we're to make the kind of goals that the state, unless the state is not genuinely interested in those goals.
Understood. So I'm hearing you suggest that we create a performance metric that would give them some skin in the game in terms of achieving the state goals for deployment. All right. Oh, I'm sorry, you're on mute again. I don't. Oh, nope, you're on mute again.
And environmental justice also. I really think that's an important component of getting things squared away in the cities,
Got it. All right. Thank you very much for your time this evening, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next up, I have Mr. Stram. So just make sure you get off mute there, sir. Oh. Mr. Stram, I got to get you off mute there.
Is his name Mr. Stram? I don't have him.
Oh, I think it's Mr. Stram. I'm sorry, you're on mute.
Is that better?
It is, thank you.
Sorry about that. Yeah, the last speaker just said something about justice. I help seniors in Danbury and Connecticut, all over, mostly New Fairfield, to understand their electric bill, to analyze their electric bill, and to see what can be done about their high rates that they're getting. I have had help with the commission in the past. I was doing some work at a church in Danbury, and the metering had been wrong by CL&P. I thought I was looking at 4 months worth of bills, but it went back years, and with the help of the commission, it took 3 months though to get to Eversource to acknowledge that there was a metering error, and they did get $18,000 back in cash. What I'm getting at is when I go over these bills, this solar is not justice. It's very discriminatory for people that do not have this solar. And there's a lot of problems with that. They're not paying for the delivery charge. And I've written to the mayor of Danbury. I got no response. I never get response. I don't know because I'm a conservative if that's it, but whatever it is, I do not get responses. They're looking forward in 9 years to be getting $700,000 a year with solar on 5 schools and the library. What they don't realize is they're not paying for the delivery charge. I am. And all the utility customers that don't have solar are paying for that, and our rates are going up on the delivery. One of the customers that I take care of their electric for is the Danbury Fish and Game Association. In 1 month, they had $23 worth of energy. I have an outside supplier, but so does Eversource. They don't generate, they buy from an outside supplier. They buy from an outside supplier also. They had $23 worth of energy. They had $311 for delivery. It's the delivery charge that's killing the seniors that I help out on their bills. There are other ways they can do it. Yeah, energy, LED lighting and things. I put that in too. I'm an electrical engineer. I'm an electrical contractor. I'm an electrical inspector in Connecticut also. But I'm now I got an emeritus. I'm an octogenarian, so I got a nice plaque from the OEM department there. What I'm getting at is this, I'm not against clean energy, but it's become unaffordable for many people. Just start phoning. It's not affordable. And it's not, how about the people that don't have roofs? How about people that are renting? This is discriminatory for low income people. They're very discriminatory. In Florida, they just changed something there with their PUC, with their commission there. They tried in another state to have a separate rate for people with solar so that they pay for their own transmission, their own delivery rather, I should say. The courts, a liberal court said it was discriminatory to have two different rate structures. But it wasn't discriminatory for people that don't have solar to have to pay for somebody else. That has changed in Florida. I know there's a lot of people in Connecticut, they don't like Florida, they don't like Texas. But their commission is now with the utilities. The utilities understand this problem, but there's nothing they can do about it because they're a monopoly, they're regulated. They do have problems, but I think the investors, you know, the only reason they have investors is because they're taking it out. They've been demonizing fossil fuels. The state of Connecticut has renewable portfolio standards, RPS. This year it's 22% has to be solar in the power that you buy. That's forcing people off of fossil fuels. I thought it was unconstitutional to force people off of fossil fuels or to force Americans, period. So I'm paying that for an outside supplier, or my outside supplier would be cheaper. Next year, it goes up to 24%, and it goes up to 26%. So eventually, they'll be able to get rid of fossil fuels, which I don't think you're going to be able to do. I was with Citizens Utilities. I was a corporate electrical engineer. I supplied power down in the island of Kauai in Hawaii. I know David Arcani mentioned Hawaii. They've taken all that out. I used to burn bagasse as a byproduct of sugarcane to generate electric there. And they put solar in. The second week they had it, they had not enough sun. They had blackouts. So they want rolling blackouts on the island of Kauai in Hawaii. And if you put a whole, people don't understand that they want more solar. They weren't getting as much as they wanted because of past bills, or they didn't qualify for it. They don't understand that if they have their whole roof with it and they have whole house air conditioning, they can't meet the peak. They still have to buy. If they go now with the storage, they're selling power to the utility company. The utility has to buy it at retail price, at retail pricing. What does that do for people that don't have the storage? They're paying for higher electric. The cost of solar is a lot more than the fossil fuels. That's why the outside suppliers could be a lot less. But now they're being forced by the state of Connecticut and other states to make a mixture of what they buy. They have to buy solar. I'm against buying the solar if it's going to raise my rates. I'm against paying for somebody else's, who's not paying their fair share of delivery on what they generate. So that's only one part. There's other things too. I don't understand what happened. That is the Public Utilities Regulatory Commission reporting to DEEP now. There's been a change. I can't understand that change. The Department of Environmental Protection and Energy and Environmental Protection. Do you report to them? Are they in charge of the commission?
That, I think you're referring to about a decade ago, a reorganization where PURA was put into DEEP. I do not report to DEEP. I'm appointed by the governor and confirmed by the House and the Senate. So I operate as a nonpartisan independent. But I'm respectful of what you're saying.
Okay, because yeah, I worked for utilities for over 40 years, different utilities. I was superintendent of electric utilities down in the village of Freeport. I wasn't very well liked because they had a rate structure, and there were people like in New York City, the welfare department, they send people out to the village of Freeport in Long Island because it's cheaper, and they're supposed to be paying the electric bill. They haven't paid it for years. When I became superintendent, I could only go back 3 months in arrears, but I forced them to pay $1.2 million so that the people didn't have to pay for deadbeats that weren't paying, or the utility, the New York City welfare wasn't paying for the people they sent there for their electric bills. Obviously, I wasn't very popular with the mayor. He lined up around the block. People lined up to pay cash and get demand they have their television set put on. And they blocked up the roads and everything, but they paid. And I was hired for a 6-month contract as the superintendent of electric utilities to raise the electric rates. Their electric rates were $15 for 500 kilowatt hours. CLMP at that time was $75 for 500 kilowatt hours. Con Ed was $120, although more than 50%, I say, is tax, is not going to their investors. People didn't understand that. So I could easily have raised it to $18 that the mayor wanted. But I looked into it and found out they had a cash flow problem. I never raised it. They didn't need an increase because they were buying power from Canada at 4 mils per kilowatt hour. But yeah, my life was threatened. Well, not threatened, but the village of Freeport was threatened by Luco. I was invited out to Hicksville, and that's how they operate. They wanted to shut the power off with the power authority in the state of New York to the village of Freeport because they couldn't get enough on the transmission line without Shoreham Nuclear Power Plant. And without, yeah, yeah, okay, but the solar, this thing about climate change has been changing for 20,000 years. I don't know that you're going to be able to change it without fossil fuels. You can do it more gradually. In fact, you don't need a transmission line. They're having those problems now where they're putting electric vehicles on. It's messed up the system for the utilities. They're now peak shaving on base loading on the solar because they have to take it. And they're peak shaving with their diesels. And it doesn't work that way. They're ruining their diesels. A lot more maintenance is required. So it's getting more complicated to operate a utility company. So I don't know. I don't really, you can have solar, another source of power. You don't even need to be with a utility, but you're not allowed to be competition. The commission originally was formed to take the form of utility competition. Now they're protecting the utilities from private sector competition. So I'm in the private sector, and I don't like what I see happening because it's not affordable. That's the biggest part. It's hurting a lot of people that are suffering. They can't pay their electric bills, and the tax is the highest in Connecticut, has the highest energy costs. They also have very high taxes, and people are leaving Connecticut for Florida and Texas. My own 3 children are down in Texas now. So
sorry, Mr. Stram, I have to move on in this speaking order. But
thank you for the opportunity to talk.
I really appreciate your perspective. Thank you. Okay, so I'm gonna turn to our next speaker. I have Shirley McCarthy, please.
Oh, hi. First of all, I want to Thank you, Marissa, for your leadership of PURA. I really am impressed and I like the direction in which it's going. I do have a question at the end, but I first want to read a few sentences from this report that came out of Yale Environment 360 last year, entitled, "A Leading US Utility Stealthily Fights Electrification of Heating Systems." So just a couple of sentences in this report. At a recent industry presentation, Eversource officials outlined a strategy to continue using natural gas for years to come and to fight growing efforts to decarbonize the heating of buildings. The presentation warned that natural gas is in for the fight of its life and called for a lobbying campaign in which everyone needs to contact legislatures in favor of natural gas. Another slide asked how the natural gas industry could take advantage of power outage fear. They conclude by saying electrification of heating systems, this is the conclusion of the author, poses a financial threat to Eversource since they paid $1.1 billion a year or two ago to acquire the Massachusetts-based assets of Columbia Gas. Another topic, instead of burying the lines so we can keep our thousands of trees that have been cut to mitigate climate change, they continue to prune and cut our trees that are so valuable to life on this planet. And one more thing, Energy News Network reported that electric and gas utilities spent $24 million on lobbying state lawmakers in Connecticut between 2013 and 2020. So my question is, how can there be high-level talks with the leaders of these utilities to say, come on, we've got to do the right thing. We have a climate emergency. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McCarthy. I appreciate your comments. I just want to make sure that I can synthesize appropriately. So I think you're the second speaker that we've heard this evening reference undergrounding. And I'm wondering if we can put a fine point on what the suggested performance objective might be that we could consider around that point through this proceeding. Do you have, can I just draw that out from you a little bit more?
The undergrounding, well, there's an authority that is on here named Michelle Hershoff, who's written extensively about how it would be cost effective in the long run, and we would have fewer outages if the utilities would underground.
Thank you very much. I look forward to learning more about that. So thank you for your comments this evening. I see another hand up here. Got Nathan Phelps, please.
Thank you, Chair Gillette. My name is Nathan Phelps, I'm Regulatory Director at Vote Solar. I'll keep my comments quite brief today. I just want to once again thank you, Chair Gillette, for the opportunity to speak here and also for PURA providing this opportunity for members of the public. I think this docket is really quite critical to making sure that we aligned the financial interests of the investor-owned utilities with the policies and desires of the people of Connecticut. So ultimately, I think that that will really necessitate making sure that we have a clean, renewable, reliable, and equitable energy system. And one point, I think one outcome that is really critical to this is not only what the utilities are doing, the investor-owned utilities are doing, but also transparency of what they're doing. So I think that in and of itself, transparency into the outcomes of the utility is a desirable outcome. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Phelps, as always, for your time. Can I ask you one question in response to that? When you say transparency, can you elaborate a little bit more about transparency into what aspect, please?
Sure. There's many different things we could talk about in regard to that. A few examples, for instance, disconnections. How often or how many disconnections do each of the investor-owned utilities have on a monthly basis, the arrears of those customers that actually lead to disconnections, another topic altogether. In regard to interconnections, how quickly are interconnections processed for distributed energy resources? How many distributed energy resources do the utilities actually have on their system? And importantly, call upon for meeting peak demand. Those are a few examples.
Thank you very much. Look forward to discussing that further in the proceeding. So I'll move, I've got two more hands up here. So Mark Lemke, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I applaud your effort. I think this is really, really great and a big chance. However, I feel we will not successful if you are not successful. So we have just very, very different interests to the utilities, not only in the energy, but on the water side. I'll come to that in a minute. My biggest hope would be that there are more of you personally, because at the same time, I think PURA is not set up in terms of system, people, and processes to actually handle that. So I really, really hope you are successful, but at the moment, I doubt it. And then we've been working mainly on the water side. What I see there is really terrible. And just recently, Aquarium announced that they will invest hundreds of millions every year over the next couple of years. So my question is to you, what does it take to get the water utilities into that system as well? Because if we are not doing this fast, the complete almost 1 billion will go again into the ground with unnecessary infrastructure. Thank you.
You. Well, first, Mr. Olympia, and I apologize if I'm not pronouncing that right. I would invite you to email me. I'm happy to discuss process improvements at PURA anytime. I can't discuss anything that's under consideration in a docket, but as long as we're not talking about a docket matter, I would be happy to have a conversation with you about your feedback on PURA. So I'd welcome that, and I can send you my email address. On the Aquarian question, I think it's really interesting. The Take Back Our Grid Act asked us to focus on electric utility performance-based regulation first, but I think like any sector that we regulate, there are, once you set up a framework, it should be transferable to other utilities that we regulate, as the principles of utility regulation are largely applicable across the board. So I wonder if you think that maybe one performance outcome that we could articulate in this proceeding is trying to improve the water electric nexus. I would need some help further thinking through this, but I want to be responsive to your points about making sure that we're not leaving water last, but also trying to focus on the electric utilities in this proceeding still. So I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, in water, I think it's fairly easy. There's the whole issue of quality, but fire protection is almost a not whatsoever being considered, almost non-compliant across the board, across the state. So it's in my view fairly easy, but you have to put it, as you said, into a framework first.
I really appreciate your comments. Thank you. Okay, I see Mikey Hershoff, please.
Here I am.
Hi.
I had really, I just see that I got some of my dinner. I had really planned to just listen in to hear the comments, because as Shirley mentioned, I have put into the docket on resilience a memorandum with regard to why we should have undergrounding. And I have, but off the top of my head, to answer your question about how that fits in to this docket, which is about performance-based regulation, in which you're going to have goals. I've listened in because I think it's very important to consider what your goals are. And if the goals aren't set high enough in terms of, by which I really mean that the power outages shouldn't last very long, then we're not going to get the kind of improvements we need for true resilience. And right now there seems to be an acceptance of a kind of 4 days is fine. I think 4 days has extraordinary socioeconomic costs to the state and to the people in it, to their safety and their health. And, at other states, such as in Virginia with Dominion Energy, they've been finding that strategy of undergrounding has led to reduced cost of operation and maintenance. And I think in long term would lead to more stable rate structure for their residents and the businesses. And I think that's the way they're moving. So I guess the only thing I would say is that you have to reach a conclusion about what's acceptable and take into account the social and economic costs of outages in determining what degree of resilience we need to have. And again, off the top of my head, I think you might have different goals for day-to-day reliability, for the kind of minimum outages that sometimes occur, for the short-term outages that sometimes occur, and then different for a major storm. And then you have gradations of storms as well, and it's very hard to predict them all. But at the same time, when you're setting those goals, you may want to make them moving goals so that as the utilities, let us say they decide they want to do undergrounding because in the long term, that really is going to be the wisest decision, then you would want to have them allowed to say, have much shorter outages, say 10 years hence, than they would have right now. So that's as far as I can go, just thinking off the top of my head.
That's really helpful. And I've read your memorandum, and I saw there was a revision that you submitted today. So we're actively looking at that in our 8th track of the grid mod. I was fascinated by the comments earlier, thinking through, like, in terms of setting the goals high enough. And in my mind, performance-based regulation, we're trying to almost extrapolate upwards from there and say, okay, if we have these dockets, like our grid mod docket, where we're considering undergrounding and other metrics, is there something higher than that would tell the utilities that they need to do that type of innovation without having to have these smaller dockets that is pulling it out? So I don't know if I'm making any sense, but I would welcome yours or others' feedback, now or later, to think about how through performance-based regulation, we're almost taking it a step up and thinking, like, how do we drive how do we send the right price signals to the utilities to achieve something?
Well, I think that is exactly the problem, and it does go to the point that I mean, you can say, okay, we want you to do undergrounding, we want you to go do this. The virtue of, if the goals are set correctly, the virtue of setting these goals to be met in terms of the policy goals that you want for the state in terms of reliable and resilient power, it allows the utilities to do it in a way that at least in theory would be more efficient for them. And they are the ones that ought to have the knowledge to determine how best to do it, where to put the undergrounding first and second and third. Now, there are other policy goals that come in. For example, we want to also perhaps protect the tree canopies and allow tree canopies in areas that are going to get the worst effects of climate change. So we may not want to do it completely, leave it entirely in the hands of the utilities to make that determination. And again, I'm just thinking out loud right now in terms of PBR, but I can think about it a little bit more. But my focus has really been on why undergrounding is a better choice, especially as we're electrifying the economy and being more and more dependent on it. And then I'd also like to make a point. I think that in terms of the grid, if I'm about to put in solar, and I know that it's going to get connected back in, and I don't know all the equities that were discussed by Mr. Stram, but I do think that if the power that I generate is going back into the grid, then I am making some sort of contribution to the clean energy goals as well, for which probably I should get some compensation as well.
Thank you very much. I look forward to hearing more about this from you, and I hope we continue to see you in track 8 of our grid mod. We've got tech meetings coming up in a week or two, so
time.
Thank you very much for being here.
Yeah.
All right, let's see, Mr. Millman, good evening. The floor is yours, sir.
Good evening. So thanks so much for having this listening session. I want to give a lot of credit to Representative Arconti for sort of, in a sense, starting this process in motion, but also to you, of course, for taking up the challenge. I have not thought very much about performance-based regulation, so my thoughts are going to be pretty unorganized, and I apologize for that. I am supportive, but I also have concerns. One is that, you know, I guess it's unintended consequences. You write performance metrics, you think that here's how it could turn out, and it turns out that there's more than one way to get to that goal, and you've left it up into the hands of the utilities to do that. And it may be sort of slightly nefarious what they do, gaming the system, but it may also just be a misunderstanding, or just something unforeseen. You know, thinking, I've actually designed games that people play, and you change the rules of a game and the outcome is very different. You can see that in software design also. And maybe I'm picturing something that is much more complicated than what performance-based regulation would actually turn out to be, but that unintended consequence. So one thing I would say is that I hope that there's a lot of gaming built into this. In other words, that somebody should be almost like hacking the performance metrics to see how many different ways are there to interpret these metrics and to get to the goals, some of which we may not have foreseen. Now, and as I say that, I have so much confidence in your thoroughness and thoughtfulness, because I've seen how PURA has gone after the grid modernization dockets, thinking through many more things than I ever would have come to, but it is a concern. I also wonder a little bit about policy constraints versus performance criteria. So just to take one thing, caps on commercial solar, which is on the minds of a number of people now. That's a policy issue that I don't think performance criteria can solve. It may run up against those caps and help to remove them, or at least to clarify their importance, their value. But I think it will be interesting as we do this to see what policies are actually thwarting the performance criteria that we would like to achieve. And maybe that's enough of my unorganized thoughts. I have more, but they go downhill from here. So.
I didn't actually find that unorganized. On your first point, I think to borrow the analogy, I am not a software developer, but if I just boiled it down to 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, I feel like I'm almost hearing you suggest that whatever we do set up needs to have, like we've been doing in grid mod, building in annual check-ins or resets to make sure that the objectives or the deployment targets are still appropriate. So it's almost like a caution for us at PURA as we design this to make sure that we're building in the flexibility to like evaluate, measure, and verify, and then adjust. Is it?
That makes a lot of sense.
Okay, and then on your latter point, I would encourage you, I know you and Bernie and others have put a lot of thought into this. I do think that there's a way to set performance targets that would inform program designs. I mean, so I don't know how to articulate that to you tonight, but I have every confidence that you can think about like using the commercial solar cap example. I bet that there's a way to design an objective, like you're telling the utility, we don't want to deploy, or we don't want to purchase more than X megawatts from these resources. I mean, like there's got to be a way that you can set a high level target, and then in lieu of I'm just using this as an example, but in lieu of a cap, like these are the objectives about how to design it. I think you and I are similarly maybe unorganized in our thoughts this evening, so I'll let you go back and think through that. But there's obviously an opportunity for additional feedback in the docket, so I'll leave that to you.
Great. Well, thanks very much. I think this will be an interesting process that that Connecticut. I think we're fortunate to embark on it. You know, that so few states have done it, so we can we have the opportunity to think it through from sort of the ground floor up. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next up we have Jean Mertz, I apologize.
Hello, thank you very much for including me in this. Your discussion is way above my pay grade. I'm a simple homeowner, 79 years old, who finds that I have now a supply and a delivery number on my monthly bill. And the delivery price is often double the supply price. I want to thank you for what PURA is doing. I never could have been included in a meeting like this. Our responses were never elicited or accepted. And I want you to know you've made a big difference already, because Eversource is letting me know whenever there's an outage. They're telling me how long they think it's going to take to fix it. They want me to look at their website, and that never happened before you and PURA made some requirements on that. But I want you to know that my delivery cost this month and last month for my natural gas is way above anything I can afford or have ever anticipated. And it can't continue to go up, or I won't be able to live in my house and heat it. And I will pay attention. Let us know when we can be helpful. And you are doing great things, but it's got to happen faster. And I think the people are right about underground. I have underground running from the street to my house, and I've never had a problem. Whereas, you know, during Storm Isaias, we were without power for days. And also the trucks were lined up in the parking lot off the highway, and nobody was telling them where they were needed. Now, I know there was no coordination between Eversource and the towns, and evidently the towns had to cut the trees off the road so that Eversource could use the roads. But I just know that Eversource had crews of people who were eating and sleeping at very expensive places, and they weren't being utilized. And they need to get on top of that too. Thank you very much for letting us talk to you tonight.
Absolutely. I really appreciate you bearing with us. I'm going to ask my staff to put into the chat. We have done YouTube videos. They're about 6 minutes long for the electric bills that explain the breakdown of the bill. We haven't done it for gas yet. But the reason I'm flagging that to everybody on the line is, you know, one of our objectives has been to provide transparency into what is going into your bill and the drivers, to make sure you know who to advocate to if you don't want each piece to increase. So I just want to make sure that that resource is available. But maybe if I could say back to you what I hear you saying in terms of an objective that we could target, besides the very obvious affordability one, which is front and center for us. I think maybe if I could turn your first part of it into it, it's not just that that PURA needs to be receptive or hear from customers, but maybe we should design an objective or a goal around making sure that the regulated utilities are building in a feedback loop with their customers. I'm not sure how to articulate this, but I'd love to go back and forth with you a little bit about it, either now or invite your comments and by email later in the docket.
Thank you. Let's do it by email so that I don't waste everyone else's time. They don't care. They never have cared. And now you're forcing them to care a little bit, but they really don't care about my feedback. They just want my money, and they are making huge, huge profits.
Appreciate that. Right. Thank you very much for being here. And see, Johan Epka.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'll just say, Jean, I care. Some of us on this call care. Thank you so much, Chair Gillette. My name is Johannes Epka. I'm a staff attorney at Conservation Law Foundation, and we are very interested in this docket, and my colleague Shannon Lawn will likely be more directly involved. But I just wanted to comment to first thank you for having a listening session generally and for holding it at a time when people that work during the day could come. I really appreciate opening that up and engaging in dialogue, and you have certainly been really receptive, and I appreciate all of that. I also just wanted to note, I was very encouraged by Mr. Ryer's explicit reference of resilience as one of the goals of this. It seems like Tropical Storm Isaias was sort of a wake-up call, or one of the reasons why Connecticut is interested in doing this work, and the resilience aspect of that. Whether or not, as a previous speaker noted, we have time to mitigate climate change, that's another conversation. We know that the effects of climate change are upon us now, and dealing with the adaptation and resilience part is a separate conversation and a really important one. And I would just encourage PURA to think about how to incentivize resilience and how to make those standards more explicit. If you decline a cost recovery for a downed power line, that will certainly incentivize utilities to underground them very quickly, and making sure that the utilities know when they have to do that, or what the standards are for that, I think would be really important. And not just for infrastructure, for operations as well. Vegetation management, all of that can be addressed and is really helpful in addressing the resilience of the utility and how often the electricity or gas goes down. So I think that's all I have for today. Really appreciate the time and for staying on this hour. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you. And I do know Shannon, she's been in several of our dockets. I look forward to y'all participating. One thing I'd flag on your comments, whether you have feedback tonight or Shannon wants to provide it later, on the resilience piece, I'm really interested in metrics that other states have used for resilience. I mean, on reliability, we have SAIDI and SAFE and all those things. I'm not, and we have a whole 8th track of grid mod that we're looking at this, but in the spirit of performance-based regulation, and you can't enforce penalties or incentives on things you can't measure, I continue to be interested in innovative approaches to measure resilience. So to the extent that you all come across in your work in other states, metrics for resilience or anything of that nature, definitely welcome input on that.
We will submit written comments going forward. I will say very briefly, I think that there are metrics in both vulnerability assessment and in standards for response. I think it's important to remember that, not a one-size-fits-all approach is very helpful for a power plant or transmission line, and thinking about elevation, temperature variation and so forth, I think is helpful. And California is going through a process right now of doing very serious vulnerability assessment of utilities, and I would point to that as a helpful starting place and a good model that we have looked to.
Thank you very much. All right, I have Melissa Cops, please.
Sorry to lengthen this at the last minute. But I've been listening to this. I'm not very familiar with regulatory processes when it comes to utilities, but kind of want to throw some other things out there in terms of metrics, particularly related to some stuff that Jean said about equity and utility rates, and especially related to electrification, knowing that our most vulnerable communities that have low incomes would benefit the most from having electrification in their homes. But because of the high electric rates, it's a disincentive for them to do so. So I'm wondering if there's some performance metric that would allow people like Jean to get off of gas and get a heat pump in their home that would increase their health outcomes, and also do it affordably. Or if there's, I don't know if there's some way to bake something like that in, but I think that would be something that kind of got out of the box of what utilities normally look at and really think about like common benefits to everyone in the state, and how we can, you know, both advance our greenhouse gas emission reduction goals at the same time improve people's health and make their energy more affordable.
I'm sure there is something that we can design for the cross-cutting. I like what you're suggesting there. I think to say it back to you, looking for a performance metric that captures the overlap between affordability and health and the cross-cutting. I will flag that another thing out of the Take Back Our Grid Act, like I said, that it had dozens and dozens of things. It gave PURA the authority to establish a low-income discount rate for electric customers, which is a separate docket that we are actively working on right now. So, but besides that, I appreciate the feedback about building that into the performance objectives here. So, thank you for the comments. See, Mr. Rothenberger.
Thank you, Chairman Gillette. Waiting to the end to give folks who are not before you all the time a chance to speak, but it looks like the hands have slowed down, so I will seize the opportunity. Want to thank you for holding this public listening session, and particularly, as others have said, scheduling at a time that maximizes the number of citizens that can participate. I think that's fantastic. This proceeding really does afford a great opportunity to increase the efficiency of the electric utilities, as well as to better align utility incentives with our public policy goals, particularly in the area of environmental and climate policy. As you're aware, Connecticut is not completely new to the concept of performance-based regulation. We've adopted revenue decoupling mechanisms for both the electric and gas utilities, as well as having established performance incentives related to those utilities' management of the state's energy efficiency programs. Thanks to your leadership, Connecticut is also making great progress in aligning utility investment with state policy goals through the various equitable modern grid dockets that have been established. So this proceeding is really well positioned to build on those efforts. Again, appreciate the efforts of Chairman Arconti and the legislature for highlighting this. While we understand the focus of this docket is on the electric utilities, we also recognize the interest among stakeholders in pursuing a future of gas docket at some point. So we should really approach this exercise recognizing that the lessons learned will be valid for the gas utilities in any subsequent processes as well, and ensuring that the general principles that we establish here work for them as well. And I think this came up in the discussion of the water utilities previously, so we definitely support that. And while there will obviously be areas specific to each utility when it comes to specific performance metrics, there may also be areas of significant overlap, particularly when it comes to meeting the statutory requirement that the PBR framework advance the state's environmental goals, including the goals established in the state's Global Warming Solutions Act. An integral part of meeting those goals will be moving away from natural gas and fossil fuel heating to renewable thermal technologies such as heat pumps. And metrics to achieve that outcome will by necessity involve both electric and gas utilities. And as you know, there are a lot of different flavors of PBR. and the various elements can be adopted either individually or in tandem. This is a great process since I think clearly at the outset, the most important thing is to develop a clear sense of what we want to accomplish, what are the priorities, what behaviors and outcomes we want to encourage. And in addition to ensuring that the appropriate PBR framework is being adopted, it's also important to ensure that the incentives are designed appropriately to motivate the appropriate behavior. And I think this has also been set out that when setting these performance targets, we really want those targets to be challenging. They should be achievable, but they should be at stretch standards that go well beyond what the utilities should already be doing as a matter of course. And conversely, performance penalties should be set to ensure that the existing standards of reasonable performance are met. A concrete example of this might be the deployment of advanced metering infrastructure, which I know is also part of an ongoing docket. From our perspective, certainly achieving a comprehensive deployment of AMI throughout the state for all customers should be considered a baseline expectation for the companies. In this instance, an asymmetric incentive mechanism may be warranted through which the utilities are penalized for failing to achieve that goal, but are not eligible for rewards for meeting that baseline expectation. Also, establishing a regular data collection process to evaluate the performance of the utilities with respect to meeting baseline expectations should be established in order to properly evaluate that performance. It's critical that the utility reporting is transparent and easily understood by the public so that stakeholders can properly evaluate whether and how well the utility has actually performed against the goal. And the current reporting structure isn't really aligned to support the best performance. And part of that may be that utility performance is generally rather opaque. It's buried in dockets, it's buried in individual filings that are difficult to determine which filing actually has the information that you're looking for. So a more transparent and public-facing process and reports are certainly warranted. And we will certainly have more detailed comments and input as we begin the stakeholder workshop process. But in addition to the frame setting comments that I've set forth, one area that we'd definitely like to highlight is enhancing the adoption of clean distributed energy resources here in the state. This is an area in which the utilities traditionally have not been enthusiastic partners, to say the least. And that certainly has to change in order to meet our climate goals, as well as increasing grid reliability and resilience as part of our clean energy future. So I really appreciate the opportunity and thank you.
Thank you very much. And maybe I can invite you to share more through written comments or testimony later to draw out more of the point that I think you're making about the overlap between the gas and the electric sector, like we're talking about earlier, the water sector, and whether there's, yes, the opportunity to create a framework that's transferable, but maybe there's also the opportunity to set goals recognizing that overlap. So I don't know, that's piqued my interest. So I'd really invite you and others to think more about that and maybe draw it out through written comments.
Fantastic. We will do that and happy to explore that in more detail. Thank you.
Thank you. Jean.
Thank you. You know, I am a clean air person. I have had a heat pump. This is not the climate where a heat pump is efficient. Maybe a water-based heat pump, and I would have to drill a well to get a water-based heat pump. But my air-based heat pump just cost $300 a month to heat a 1,500 square foot house. So heat pump in this climate is not the answer, and neither is solar, to be perfectly honest with you. We get many, many days in the wintertime when there is no sun, and I would need a battery in my cellar to make solar efficient here. And the batteries cost a fortune. I'll probably have to have a battery when we have to buy electric vehicles anyway. I would really like to be a conservation person, but while we have natural gas and while we can get gasoline, I don't understand why we're not using it. Thank you very much once again for having this conversation.
Thank you. I definitely appreciate those comments. we do have a battery storage program that launched through GridMod this year. If anyone's ever interested, we did get some sizable incentives, particularly if you're in a community that loses power or is at the grid edge. So feel free to reach out if you're ever interested in participating in that program. But I appreciate your comments. It looks like we're into round two, which I didn't totally anticipate. So gentlemen, if you wouldn't mind, I just want to make sure, is there anyone in the audience who has not had a chance to be heard this evening? So I want to make sure that we give everybody that opportunity this evening. So gentlemen, if you just bear with me for one moment here. If anyone in the audience has not had an opportunity to be heard that wanted to be heard this evening, I'm looking for the raise hand function. And if you can't find it, if you just take yourself off mute, that should flag you to me as well. Okay. If not, I'm happy to cede the floor one more time to Mr. Stram and Mr. Panzarella. I am interested in this conversation generally. I'm also really interested in how the conversation could turn into a performance-based metric or objective or outcome for the utilities. So let's see, I think I saw Mr. Stram, and then I'll go to Mr. Panzarella, and then maybe we will call it an evening here. Sorry, Mr. Stram, you are on mute.
Okay. Yeah, it all comes down to it hasn't been addressed. The electric bills are discriminatory in the state of Connecticut. And until you do that, Mrs. Mertz is going to still have her problem. A lot of people are suffering and not able to pay their electric bills. It's that simple. I'm not against solar, but it's costing non-solar people unfairly, unjustly to pay for them. So until you can get reasonable rates, you're not going to have reasonable rates if they're discriminatory. So you have to first admit that they're discriminatory, and then you have to tackle that problem. And then when you're adding solar or you're doing distributed energy, you're going to have more transmission lines because you're putting more load on them. They're more vulnerable to cyber terrorists and terrorism. The underground is a wonderful thought, but we have rocks in Connecticut. The cost for doing it underground is so substantial over overhead that who's going to pay for that? Putting windmills 25 miles off of the coast of Boston might be efficient windmills, but what does it cost for 25 miles of underground cabling, high voltage cable, and who pays for the delivery charge? And if those delivery charges keep going, like I said, Danbury Fish and Game, $23 for energy, $311 for delivery. I wrote to the commission, I wrote to Eversource. I did get a response from the commission after 3 months. They said nothing about it being outrageous, because I said it was outrageous. I also said it was inaccurate. They said that's the way they always bill it. That's the answer I got. It was inaccurate. That's the way it is. So that's not a very good answer. And I think the people that I work with in the senior centers, they're hurting. So that's all I have to say. Go ahead with the future and what you want, but climate change has to be affordable also. And you're not getting climate change if you spent $1.3 trillion since 1978 with the Department of Energy and the Environmental Protection Agency. And what has been the results? Why do we have more frequent storms and more severe storms? What is the result? They're burning wood for energy, electric energy, in Burlington, Vermont. That happens to be where Bernie Sanders lives. He's all in favor of that. So are the people, because that wood for them is one of the cheapest resources. It's right there. However, burning the wood has more emissions than burning coal. So, here's a case where he's for it, but it's not helping the environment when it's more emissions than coal. And there's a lot of problems with the science that is being presented to the public. And I think they're only getting one view from the newspaper. But anyway, that's all I have to say right now. I appreciate this, opportunity, and I think, PURA is doing a great job. I think their intent is very good. I think the utilities' intents are very good. They're a monopoly. They're not a private sector. If they were the private sector, they'd have antitrust. But you can't take them for antitrust. But you can't treat them as if they're a private business. They're not. They're a monopoly. But you are doing a good job, and so are the utilities. We have to bring logic and reason and not junk science. We have to bring real science. Solar works. I'm not against solar, but you cannot do it at the expense of events
from the summer of 2020.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stram. I hear what you're saying, and for this proceeding, I would synthesize what I'm hearing from you as we need to make sure that the rate design and the affordability aspect remains front and center as we're setting objectives and metrics for the utilities. So I hear you. I appreciate your comments this evening.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Panzarella, it looks like you're going to get the last word for this public hearing.
Wow, that's a big one. First, I want to just say thank you again. Thank you. This has been a great process, and I think it really helps people to sort these things out. Just a couple of quick comments, though, on the last speaker, what he said about digging. We dig underground lines all the time for many things in the cities, but we don't do it efficiently. We don't do all the things that need to be done in one time. Instead, they dig it over and over again, the same places. And to me, it's quite affordable if it's done carefully and properly and in a measured way. It doesn't have to all be done in one time. It can be done in a reasonable way. That is one thing. The other thing, I think, what Gene said about solar, I've had solar on my house for several years, and trust me, we get extremely good solar service in the wintertime. It's not the way she's perhaps afraid of it, but it works very well in the wintertime. But my question to you is about setting these standards for the utilities. One question that comes to my mind is that there are electricity distribution companies that also own gas distribution companies. And so there's a bit of a tension for those companies on really having the will to implement things that will move us towards the goals of the state as far as the climate change and reducing the amount of, they don't have the incentive to want to reduce the gas, natural gas, if if they own a natural gas company. So it's sort of something that needs to be taken into consideration when the goals are set, because there is a bit of a conflict of interest for them in that regard. So I just thought that's something that needs to be sort of measured in some way. I don't know how you do that, but it's an issue. And the other thing is the price of electricity is tagged to the price of natural gas, which is another issue that I think constrains much of these things. So if you want to talk about saving money for the elderly people and the cost of gas, these things are market driven, and they have no incentive to sell us natural gas. They can sell that natural gas anywhere, and they can make big profits, and they do make big profits on that. So the market also is an issue that bears on how oversight. It has to be taken into consideration, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, Thank you. Well, first, let me say, between you and Mr. Stram and some of the other speakers on this call, I feel like you told me the first time you talked that you weren't well versed in what we were in the acronyms and things. And I feel bamboozled because both of you and Mr. Stram and others were well versed to take this on this evening. So I thank everyone for participating. And for those who aren't familiar with the point Mr. Panzarella is making at the end, natural gas prices and electric prices are indeed tied together because the regional grid in the Northeast generates electricity from natural gas as the primary source of fuel, which is why our supply rates went sky high in January. So hopefully everyone walked away this evening having learned something, courtesy of Mr. Panzarella. But thank you for those comments, sir. I think that's a little bit what I was hinting at to Mr. Rothenberger earlier about through this proceeding. I would really enjoy unpacking whether there are metrics or objectives, even though we're focused on electric utilities, understanding how they overlap with their gas or water affiliates, I think is an interesting point. I look forward to engaging in this proceeding. So with that, I think we have reached the end of our proceeding this evening. Hopefully everyone walked away having learned something. I know I did. We are open to comments in writing after this at pura.executivesecretary@ct.gov, referencing 21-05-15 or PBR or anything that tells us that you're trying to get a comment into this docket. We have 100 active dockets at any time, so I definitely appreciate when you help us narrow down the docket that you're looking for. With that, I'm going to thank everybody for their time this evening. I've got 5-year-old twins that have been alternating banging on the door. So I am going to wish everybody a wonderful evening and look forward to engaging with you further through this docket. So thank you and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Yeah.